Much as I would love to sit here and tell you how great Divinity Original Sin 2 and The Witcher 3 are and how much you should totally play them, I'm betting you A, already know that, and B, you've already played them. So today, let's instead highlight some of the more recent, underappreciated RPGs. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 most underrated recent RPGs. Number 10, Grim Dawn. Admittedly, Crate Entertainment's action RPG Grim Dawn did come out in 2016, so it's not the newest RPG on this list, but it's new enough that I'm gonna arbitrarily decide that it totally qualifies because it's been overshadowed by Diablo for way too long. If you're a Diablo fanatic and you've never heard of Grim Dawn, then you're in for a treat. The class system allows for so many different possibilities and build types, there's a great loot progression system, and even in the end game, you still have plenty of interesting things to do and challenges to overcome. There's a reason that you'll find plenty of ARPG fans with over 1,000 hours in this thing, and they're still happy to keep trucking. Grim Dawn is set in Cairn, a dark fantasy world loosely based on the Victorian era. Beyond the customization and satisfying complexity of the mechanics, the hack and slash gameplay feels fantastic. Cycling through different build types and kitting yourself out each time keeps things feeling fresh, meaning that the 100th hour is just as enjoyable as the first. Though it experienced a far quieter launch than Diablo 3, which has sold tens of times that of Grim Dawn, that doesn't mean this one isn't worth your time, so pick it up if it sounds like your thing. Number 9, Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. If you've been a fan of WhatCulture for some time, firstly, lovely to have you, thanks for sticking with us. And secondly, you might remember a video we did back in 2018 where we were talking about underrated RPGs. Well, back then, the game that topped that list was Kingdoms of Amalur, so it only makes sense that now in 2022, we're going to include Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. Though it impressed plenty of fans upon release, Kingdoms of Amalur disappointed in the sales department, meaning EA dropped the rights to it after only one game. Fortunately for fans, those rights were bought up by THQ Nordic, who released the remaster Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning in 2020 for PC, PS4, and Xbox One, then bringing it to the Switch in 2021. The remaster is basically a makeover, so it should be a pleasant nostalgia trip for fans of the original who want to dive back into its massive open world, marked by its distinctly Celtic fantasy setting. Another big draw for this one is its lore, for which dense seems like an understatement, given that creative director R.A. Salvatore wrote a 10,000-year backstory for the game world. It's worth picking up for its piles of content, engrossing and colorful world, fluid combat, and ability to change up your playstyle as you go. Even if the remake tweaks are relatively minor, the game you loved back in 2012 is still all in there. Number 8, Operencia The Stolen Sun. If you're looking for a game to scratch that brutally hard old-school dungeon crawler RPG itch that I admit you may need to be over 30 years old to have, then I might have the game for you right here. Staying true to its roots, Operencia The Stolen Sun pulls no punches with its difficulty level. Much like other classic turn-based RPGs where you control a party of characters navigating a grid-based world, the challenges in combat may be severe, but they're subsequently really satisfying to overcome. Building your party correctly and speccing out your characters in the best possible way is essential. This will be a drag for those who aren't a fan of the genre, but a dream for those who are. There's also a really interesting narrative loosely based on Hungarian folklore underpinning all of that dungeon crawling and puzzling, so there's a good handful of different elements to keep you busy. The game world is really pretty, and you'll add to your party by meeting companions keen to join up with you. And for a mid-priced offering, there's an awful lot of game in there. If you're a fan of games like Wizardry or Legend of Grimrock, this hidden gem could absolutely be up your alley. Number 7, Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire. From a game I bet you hadn't heard of to one I reckon you probably have, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire might not initially seem underrated, but sales were reportedly quite low, which, having played it, is ridiculous. On the outside, it seems like Deadfire had a sublime outing, with generally positive reviews across the board, but it's always tricky to hook the same number of players into trying their hand at a sequel. It's a damn shame though that so many missed it, because Deadfire does a lot of really interesting things, the main of which is seafaring, which is a ton of fun. From the intricacies of ship combat to island exploration, crew management, a deep narrative, and of course those classic RPG elements, there's so much to love in Deadfire, and it feels like it has a particular level of polish that the first game was missing. The gorgeous game world is enormous and chock full of engaging quests, And the setting at sea is refreshing in a genre inundated by high fantasy sprawling continents and sci-fi wastelands. What else do you need to know? Go be a pirate, you'll have a blast. Number 6, Wasteland 3. Wasteland 3 is technically the third entry in a very long-running series whose original game came out before even I was born. Even me, in 1988. If this one rings a bell, that's because the setting for Wasteland, which was at the time produced by EA, laid the foundation for its cooler, hotter younger sister, Fallout. Developer Interplay couldn't get Wasteland away from EA, so they just went and made Fallout on their own instead. While Fallout went on to impress everybody and gain many suitors, it wasn't until 2003 that inXile Entertainment bought the rights to Wasteland and released Wasteland 2 in 2014. Then 6 years later, they brought out Wasteland 3. The brilliant thing about Wasteland 3 is that it retained the story-riddled isometric game world and dense RPG mechanics that Bethesda left by the wayside in the case of Fallout, in favor of offering up a more accessible experience. While Fallout went the way of first-person adventuring and, multiplayer, Wasteland luckily kept those old-school RPG mechanics that we loved in Fallout 1 and 2. Beyond that, there are meaningful choices to be made, locations are unique and memorable, the story is engrossing, and the titular Wasteland is appropriately threatening. There's plenty to do here, and many chances to prove your mettle in this entry which respects your skills and expects you to prove mastery over its mechanics. Number 5. Atom RPG. Sticking around in the post-apocalypse for this one, we've got Atom RPG from Atom Team. This indie RPG came out in late 2018 and pays homage to classics like the original Fallout games and Baldur's Gate, through its world-building, role-playing system, turn-based combat, and wildly dense character creation tool. If you're an RPG fan like me who thinks that a lot of modern RPGs just don't have enough enormous lists of numbers for you to customize, then I get you, and so does this game. There are 7 characters you can spec into, and a whole swath of skills you can upgrade if you so choose. You can also pick unique distinction features which will have varying impacts on your character. Like some of the other games on this list, this one is an RPG that takes its old school inspiration pretty seriously, meaning this is not a walk in the park. You'll want to keep quick save and quick load keys handy at pretty much all times. The dialogue might leave you a little wanting, but the story is solid, and if you just can't get enough of games that emulate that early Fallout vibe and mechanics, Atom RPG is more than adequate in that department. Number 4. ELEX. If you haven't heard of the term Eurojank before, then let me run you through it while showing you some gameplay from ELEX, which is a pretty good representation of this strangely charming subgenre. Eurojank games generally refer to European games that impressively punch well above their weight, incorporating a load of different systems, enormous worlds, and ambitious mechanics, even though they probably don't have the budget to support it. The result is a game that has every piece you could possibly want to see in a AAA game, but usually without the polish and with a hefty handful of glitches and/or general jank. Think Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl or the Gothic and Risen games, which are, coincidentally, the spiritual predecessors to ELEX and also created by developer Piranha Bytes. Eurojank isn't the put-down that it might sound like though, because all of that ambition does end up creating a genuinely enjoyable game. ELEX is underrated due to its mixed reviews, generated largely because its fascinating story, interesting quest design, and deep RPG mechanics need to be accessed through a certain amount of jank, and either you're up for that or you're not. There's no right answer really, but if you're alright with some difficult combat, then there's a great breadth of ways to customize your playstyle and gear, and plenty of interesting characters to meet amidst warring factions and a genuinely interesting story. This one won't be for everybody, but if you can look past the bugs, boy is it hard to put down. Number 3. Disco Elysium. From a delightfully dense RPG lacking in polish to a delightfully dense RPG defined by its polish, we've got Disco Elysium, the first game from UK developer Zaum. While ELEX brings that delicious old school complexity into the modern era of RPGs, Disco Elysium does something we've really not seen before. While this game is critically acclaimed, I'd argue it hasn't been picked up as much as other RPGs, because it's admittedly pretty odd, so it's still underrated. On top of that, I will personally never pass up an opportunity to talk about this slam dunk of an RPG. I bought the poster and everything. Disco's amnesiac alcoholic cop protagonist is shaped by the way you decide to roleplay him, extending to a thought cabinet system where you can choose what personality traits you'd like him to internalize. The game has no combat, but you'll be rolling digital dice against your personality traits to try and pass various mental and physical challenges throughout the game. The personality traits that define you will also pipe up during conversations you have in your attempts to solve a murder in the city of Rivachol. There's a lot going on here and an incredible amount of lore to uncover, and if you don't mind walls of texts and non-traditional gameplay, this is the RPG for you. Number 2. Kingdom Come: Deliverance. Our old pal Eurojank rears its head again to bring us the fantastic yet absolutely underrated Kingdom Come: Deliverance. There are a couple of hurdles to deal with in the way the game is optimized and some finicky mechanics, but if you know what you're getting into, it can be a total blast. The 2018 RPG from Warhorse Studios sold fairly well and received pretty good reviews, but as is the case with ELEX, Eurojank isn't for everybody. Even still, the game drew masses of players who enjoyed its historical setting taking place in Bohemia, focus on realism over fantasy, and a deep RPG gameplay system. The enjoyably punishing swordplay and battles also earned more than a few fans, as did the questing system. The vibe is pretty charming, and the game world with all the stories it has to tell is absolutely engrossing. Number 1. Cyberpunk 2077. Yep, Cyberpunk 2077. It's happening. I understand your dismay, but bear with me. Did this one launch way too broken and become very appropriately rated poorly by critics and players? Yep, but things have changed thanks to patch 1.5 to where we can comfortably call this underrated, because people like me bought it, saw it was broken, and then decided to go play other things. Now that the major issues have been addressed though, Cyberpunk 2077's gritty high-tech world is a playground ripe for exploring. Fans have finally been delivered the sprawling sci-fi RPG that was promised way back when the game was first announced. Cyberpunk 2077 is far more than the narrative around its troubled development. It offers up a vast collection of surprisingly human stories, environmental storytelling, and a veritable treasure trove of side missions and gigs that you'll encounter when you dive into Night City. NPCs feel fully realized, missions are cleverly designed to allow multiple avenues to victory, and the main story offers up a unique and intriguing cyberpunk tale that will leave its mark on the genre for a long while to come. There's a ton of depth in the character customization options, satisfying progression, and a crafting system, along with plenty of weapons and cyberware you can equip to suit your playstyle. If you've been putting off jacking into Cyberpunk 2077, then rest assured CD Projekt Red's sprawling RPG is finally worth your time. That's it from me, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other recent underrated RPGs that deserve to be on this list. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account, where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.